Good evening, and welcome to the new Bugajski Hour. I am happy to be back in Pristina to examine important global and local developments that affect the lives of all Kosovars. And today I will be discussing some important domestic questions with our analysts on the local elections that have just taken place in Kosovo. And our guest panelists on the Bugajski hot seat are Lorika Rifaj, Director of Kosovo Public Television, Jan Bratiu, the OSCE Head of Mission, and Agron Bajrami, Editor-in-Chief of Kohaditore. But first, my political commentary on a key international topic is entitled Moscow's Kosovo Offensive. A groundbreaking report recently released by the Kosovo Center for Security Studies and authored by Pelum Kalaba provides some important details on how Moscow seeks to transform Kosovo into a failed state. The Kremlin views the region as the West's soft underbelly, where the EU and NATO enlargement can be stopped and Russia's influence is magnified. Kosovo is a key target because the US and its allies have invested so much political capital to consolidate a new state after the massacres perpetrated by Milosevic's Belgrade. The report details the tools of influence and subversion that Moscow uses to undermine Kosovo, both from inside and outside the country. Above all, it seeks to delegitimize the country's independence and obstruct integration into the United Nations and other international organizations. Kosovo is exposed to a Russian-orchestrated campaign to undermine state construction and institution building. This includes infiltrating Russia's intelligence services, encouraging separatism, spreading disinformation, penetrating parties and institutions, and corrupting minority leaders. Russia is represented in Pristina through the Liaison Diplomatic Office, a branch of the embassy in Belgrade. This provides Moscow with diplomatic cover to penetrate the country with spies and provocateurs. More than 1,000 Russian citizens visit Kosovo each year as holders of Russian diplomatic and service passports exempted from visa requirements. It is unknown how long they remain in the country while engaging in Kremlin-sponsored activities. Simultaneously, the Russian-Serbian Humanitarian Center, based close to Kosovo in the Serbian town of Niš, is an outpost for Russian military and intelligence activities in the region and a potential headquarters for subversion. Russian media outlets, including Sputnik and Russia Today, conduct a propaganda barrage and incessantly depict Kosovo as a regional threat. Their attacks target the Serbian community to prevent it from integrating in a new state. Moscow-directed media in Western Europe also presents Kosovo as riddled with organized crime and ISIS terrorists, allegedly as a consequence, according to Russia, of NATO intervention. Moscow endeavors to stimulate Serbian separatism, to infiltrate the Srpska Lista, to pursue opaque business connections, exploit the Orthodox Church, and manipulate various front organizations to promote Kremlin objectives. The Pristina report also issues several warnings. Kosovo's institutions are not properly equipped to prevent Russian economic and political penetration. The government has no consistent strategy to address its diplomatic relations with Moscow. At the same time, the European Union is not ensuring equal treatment for Kosovo with the rest of the Western Balkan countries when it comes to joint foreign policy towards Russia. It is clear that for Kosovo, the US and the EU need to develop a more effective strategy to combat Russia's subversion. It is time now for the Bugajski hot seat with our guest panelists. From my left to right, Lorika Rifaj, Director of Kosovo's Public Television, Ambassador Jan Bratiu, the OSCE Head of Mission, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and Agron Bajrami, Editor-in-Chief of Kohaditore. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me. We have a lot of ground to cover, but let's start with the whole local election question. And in fact, maybe we should begin with you, Jan, regarding, as a professional assessor of elections, did the elections meet both rounds, OSCE standards? And would you say, in a longer-term perspective, that Kosovo's election process is becoming better organized and increasingly free, fair, and transparent?
Absolutely. Quite simply, absolutely. improvements from one election round to the next. And we see even improvements from the June round of early assembly elections until now the second round for the mayoral competition. No, it's a significant and very positive development. Kosovo elections, organized and administered by the Central Election Commission, are improving round by round. Doesn't mean everything is perfect, but it never is. Not in any country is everything perfect. There's one thing that I would like that I wish was different, namely the turnout. Yeah. I wish the turnout had been much higher.
What was the total, by the way?
Well, it was around 38%.
Yeah, 0.7%.
So I think we all need to do more, Kosovo institutions especially, to encourage people to take their responsibility to go out and vote. It's a basic requirement in a democratic society. But technically speaking, elections are better and better round for round.
There's a phrase that we use in America that you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you.
Absolutely.
It's critical for you. But how does it compare to other countries? How does the process here in Kosovo? Because you served in Bosnia and you know the region very well.
No, regionally, I think Kosovo is at the top of the league. I think people don't recognize that and don't give enough credit to that fact. I think Kosovo is actually doing very well. Compared to other countries in the region. So something to keep working at, but Kosovo really doesn't have anything to be ashamed of, but more work needs to be done, of course.
Let's turn to the elections themselves, and maybe start with you, Lorik. Can you sort of explain to us the importance of local municipal governments in Kosovo's administrative structure? Both for the benefit of people here, but also for the benefit of people in America who may be watching. In other words, how decentralized is Kosovo? What role do local and municipal governments actually play in the political system?
Well, actually, recently now, last years, the government is decentralized in the local municipalities, and now the municipality itself has the budget to divide to the all departments and to the major projects in municipality. Many people still don't get it. I think it's not so much explained to them. Municipalities, although have a lack of development strategic plans, not all of them, but usually now still we are faced with a situation that the central government still decides on the voters of municipal elections. So even for locally, people vote in order whoever is in the central government leading the government, that one gets more votes. We have cases recently in municipalities, whereas AAK, that has a prime minister leading the government, has won 3 new municipalities, which is Suare, Kajakova, and Drahovec, and also maintained some others. People have to understand, but I think that many municipalities that they won are mostly municipalities that work with agriculture. And they see this as a possibility that central government can give them more funds in order to invest more in agriculture, such as wineries and etc.
Jan, how decentralized do you think Kosovo is, and what more could be done to make the system, let's say, more responsive to citizens' needs?
Well, the Kosovo structure of government is essentially a decentralized structure, and a lot of policies are and policy actions are put on the municipalities. Municipalities will always complain that they don't have enough funding, they don't have the budget to implement properly. That's all over the world, you will hear that. But here in Kosovo, there is actually something to it. They do need a bit more funding. But what we also see from the OSCE's perspective is that there is a gap between central government and local government. And sometimes when policy decisions are taken or strategic plans are formulated at the state level, they are not being implemented at the local level. There's a gap there, and that's something that we need to address. We need to work on that. We also see that many municipalities don't have the administrative capacity to actually implement. So we need to look at that and to see how we can further develop the institutional capacity at the local level.
Meaning staff and resources.
Exactly, and staff who know how to do things. So there's a gap, but the gap is narrowing. We see that. Some municipalities are doing this very well, but you know, Kosovo has many very small municipalities who have very limited administrative capacity. So that's not special for Kosovo. In any country where you have small municipalities, this is one of the issues.
Right. And presumably, Agron, in terms of Pristina itself, I mean, most people in Kosovo live in Pristina. It's the major metropolis, the one major metropolis. How strong is the government, would you say, here in Pristina in determining everything that happens in the capital?
Well, I think it's like in other smaller countries in the region generally, that the head or the administration of the capital is usually the third or fourth most important level of power in the country. So it's no different here. I think that the mayor of Pristina is maybe third most powerful politician when it comes to the possibilities of affecting actually through administration and through governance. In our case, I think it has been a little bit different and more difficult because of the fact that until now the head of the municipality did not have the majority in the assembly. So many of the projects or plans that they might have planned to implement were prevented by the strong opposition. And I think that's one of the issues that might need to be addressed in future through any sort of election reform. And I think that we do need election reform, because I do agree that the elections have become better and better if we look at the election day only. But I still think that our organization is a little bit lame, so to say, when it comes to counting the vote and delivering the final results in a more rapid manner. Because we have seen, and we are seeing even now, that the more time goes, the more people are distrustful to the process itself.
You think there may be some manipulation?
Well, they think, and I think, I mean, generally in our region there is openness to sorts of conspiracy theories and doubts. But I think that's why we would need a more rapid and aggressive work to address the issue of counting the votes and delivering the final results in a more proper and faster way. On the other hand, I don't think, or at least it doesn't look to me, that the central government has that much effect on the local voter now compared to years before. I think that increasingly the voters in Kosovo are voting on individuals and on their own experience in their municipality. In Pristina, a lot of people have rejected continuously the governing structures of the national level. I think historically Pristina has been run by opposition parties of national level, which actually shows that many of the voters do not fall for this idea that, you know, the government of Kosovo will help us if we pick their guy in our municipality. Although it is true in more rural areas, because to be frank, government does use the public budget to invest more in the municipalities where they have their own people running the local administration, and I think it's unfair.
I was going to ask you actually about this, the budget question, but what you say actually is interesting, because I know several other Central East European countries where the capital, local government in the capital, or the people that voted in the capital tended to vote for the opposition rather than the major party in power. Poland is a very good example.
Well, maybe the capital people are more closer to the national government, and the fact that in Kosovo as well as in many other East European and Southeast European countries, people are keen to move forward faster, and the governments are rarely able to deliver that. And then, you know, the desperation comes into the play, and people are dissatisfied. So this dissatisfaction gets to be seen on the local level more clearly, probably.
Right. And Lorik, I was going to ask you about the budgeting. How does it work between central government and local government? Who dispenses revenue? How is it decided?
Well, usually the major cities or major municipalities get more budget, as everywhere in the world, but they had problems with the law. For example, look at the Pristina. They recently have passed the law for Pristina, and usually the main excuse for some major development projects was budget. It was the law for capital. When we compare to other municipalities, when I mentioned the rural municipalities, I was saying this because based on experience or the views that we share even with colleagues and friends and relatives that we have, I have a case, for example, a person says that, why should I vote in Pristina because I'm not getting anything, comparing to the, somebody from rural countries who is investing in his land and is getting subventions from government and even from municipality, because municipality itself has also budget for subventioning people, farmers, smaller projects comparing to bigger ones. But the main problem that I see in the municipality is that they don't have still strategy to attract investors. Still we are still we are far behind, because we know that we have lack of budget in municipalities, because we have budget in total of Kosovo is also very low. It's not even 1/3 of a budget that one television, for example, in Asia has. But we can attract investors. We need to have projects, plans, and to attract them, to have more fairs, to have more presentations. Some municipality for tourism, somebody for agriculture, and etc.
Is there any tax collection by local governments, or is this all from the central government?
Yes, there is for sure.
There is local tax as well. I mean for earnings, not necessarily for business.
Not for earnings. I think there are taxes only for properties and
property tax.
Yeah, property tax.
And business tax, I presume, of some kind.
Business tax is collected from the administration at central level.
So what you're saying, Agron, is there is some resentment when an opposition party runs a local government, that they're not being favoured, or others are being favoured, not them?
There's been a lot of complaints about that, and in previous elections it was more to be seen. This year maybe less so, because the national government actually took in charge just a month before the elections, so they might not have had time enough to interfere to that level. Also, they didn't have the budget passed, so they couldn't really dispose the money the way they might have wanted. But generally, people also, as well as local authorities in many municipalities, especially those run by the national level opposition parties, complain that they are not being treated the same when it comes to government grants for different sorts of projects, and when it comes to subventions of different sorts of fields, especially in agriculture. And in some cases it has been true. We have detected that as journalists, we have reported on that. But I think that we need more legal instruments to prevent this sort of interference of national level governance into the local level administration.
Jan, is this something that OSCE is looking at, this central government, local government relations, particularly through revenues and contracts and investments?
Yes, indeed. I mean, we have to distinguish between the regular budgetary allotment that's allocated in accordance with a certain allocation key, which is the same for all municipalities, and it's based on the census.
Right.
Then we can say that, okay, for some municipalities, maybe even many, the census is not accurate for a variety of reasons, not having to do with technical things, but political things. But the basic budgetary allotment is based on an allotment key, which is the same for everybody. What Agron is mentioning are these extra investments that come outside the budget allotment. And there might be a case to be answered, and certainly there are a lot of complaints. So this needs to be looked at closely. What we as the OSCE are trying to do is to enhance the transparency of budgetary processes and to have more inclusive budgetary processes in the municipalities, which means public hearings, multiple public hearings in municipalities in the preparation of the municipal budget, because that's also an issue. How does the municipality itself allocate its budgetary funds? Does it only go to the villages that voted for the mayor? How is it, and we hear a lot of complaints about this. Maybe not all the complaints are accurate, but at least there's a perception. So we think that more transparency and more structured procedures will increase the trust in the system. And lack of trust in the system undermines not just the local municipality, but it undermines the whole structure of administration in Kosovo.
And presumably,
that's serious.
And presumably it goes back to what you're saying at the outset, it affects turnout as well. If you don't trust your institutions, why bother voting for?
Indeed, indeed.
So it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
Lorica, and this ties into something else I was going to ask about. To what degree, I mean, look, all these countries have a problem with corruption, official corruption. At local level, how pervasive is that as compared to central level?
Well, unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of cases that were discovered of corruptions that were judged and that were that we have a verdict on them, and this also directly influences the municipalities also. The usually corruption cases that are reported are dealt with tenders that are mostly for major projects, such as I have to, although myself I don't consider this as a major project, but these are roads and construction of buildings, schools, and youth centers, infrastructures. But the reports for them are very slightly, or if I can say, very low. And the tackling of those cases of corruptions is very minor. We were hoping as a citizen, I'm talking now as a citizen, that EULEX will deal with such cases, but unfortunately they didn't. We are still waiting for these big fishes to be caught, but still no actions. And if you probably you have heard that RTK was running one investigation about the cases of EULEX, where the judge, the prosecutor that has resigned, is also telling about some pressures from EU and from other institutions that they have in several cases that EULEX is dealing with them. So it is losing trust to people, whether they can trust this justice system that has even EU monitors on them.
Agron, your take on corruption at local level, how pervasive?
Well, I think that the main actor here should be the local justice institutions, and I think they have failed to address the issue, because it's a little bit over the top to expect that EULEX will be dealing with everything on every level when it comes to corruption. And what we are talking about when we talk about the local administration is mostly cases of party-affiliated employment and contracts which are given out to businesses which support you in elections and so on. And all this out of the procedures, you know, outside of the regular procedures. And I think, unfortunately, there's been very little that our prosecutors have done to prosecute these sort of cases, which have been reported enormously in big numbers in most of the municipalities. You can find this sort of thing. And I think that the opposition parties have been allowed to criticize not everything that opposition always says is true, but at least something could be checked, and some things might come out. We have had a couple of cases, bigger ones, which have been addressed to a certain degree, for example, in Prince municipality, but we have seen that these sort of actions do not really influence that much the voters, because I think that even the voters have become somehow distrustful towards the system to the degree that they might vote regardless whether somebody has been even tried and convicted, as long as they believe that that somebody could deliver them something that they individually might want to see. So I think that there is a need of to address the corruption problem as a phenomenon, not on different levels, but as a big phenomenon that needs to be. I personally think that our agency for anti-corruption should be given different sort of powers, and I think that there should be more spotlight on the prosecution system here and the judicial system, which I think is the biggest failure when it comes to the lack of the level we would want to see of addressing these sort of issues on any level of government.
Right. The flip side of the corruption question is, I suppose, economic development, investment, bringing money into the country, and creating employment. Could local government play a bigger role in this question?
Well, as I mentioned before, yes, because if they can attract investors, they can bring, and we know that investors, they have a different kind of selection for employees, as Agron is saying, and we will not have a political employment of people, of voters, because for time being, the only case that people see themselves as employees somewhere is administration. It means that we don't have growth of economy as it is presented, because municipalities are not at their large to do something, to invest in something in which we are good. We have had several very powerful municipalities, such as Mitrovica with miners. We have Vuštri that has had several bigger factories that are still not running. They have been under process of privatization. We know how that process went, what is currently working within these projects of privatization. And I think that municipal power for the time being is not so big in order to do major things. Maybe.
Well, how does it work in terms of, let's say, a local government, Pristina, Prizren, want to attract an investor from Western Europe or America? Do they have to go through the central government in terms of signing the contract and the assessment and everything else, or can they do directly?
If we are talking about donation, yes, they need to have definitely the help of Ministry of Finance. But if we are talking about investments, no, because we have the Agency of Foreign Investments, where we have to present the plans, and they have to take part in the fairs that are being held in European or international level. And this could be as a window of the foreign investors to see where we can invest in Kosovo, because we know that working power in Kosovo is quite good, young, and the salaries are not so big comparing to EU countries. And we are third neighboring countries in EU. So the transport can be easily done comparing to China and other countries. But still, I'm not seeing any important investment coming to Kosovo. We're comparing to Albania, where they have several brands that are currently investing, and Kosovo, the latest case was Jakovo.
We might need a different sort of legislation. I think there is a lot of problems with ownership of land, for example, and in many cases the municipalities are not able to give investor proper conditions to start something. So I think that there is definitely a link or a need to coordinate between local level and national level and independent agencies such as privatization agency, and to have a different approach, maybe judicially, in terms of new laws, so that there is more favorable way of bringing investor in without having to clash different parties from different levels of, because sometimes, you know, the national level might not want to see a big investment going to a local level where the opposition party is running the municipality.
Maybe, if I may, maybe not necessarily politics. I mean, we see the privatization agency has, shall we say, control over a lot of property in Kosovo. A complaint I hear from mayors all over Kosovo is that they can't access land. The land is under the control of the privatization agency, and they're not able to provide that land for possible investors. So that's a major problem for the municipalities, and it's a complaint I hear throughout Kosovo. But another thing is the justice system, as we were talking about. An investor doesn't invest in Pristina. An investor invests in Kosovo. And it's the laws of Kosovo and the system of Kosovo that will determine whether or not an investor will have the trust in order to put money anywhere in Kosovo. And there, I think there are major challenges. Agron mentioned prosecution. I think the prosecutorial service is getting better. But what we see, because we monitor, OSCE monitors almost every corruption-related case in the courts. From January until the end of October, my colleagues monitored more than 1,400 court hearings, where we have a pretty good idea of what's going on. We see cases being brought by the prosecution, but not failing in the courts. Now, why is it failing in the courts? That I don't want to, I mean, we have some ideas, but we don't have any
evidence.
Well, we have indications. But lack of evidence, by the way, lack of evidence is maybe one of the things. But okay, so there are these issues. But justice system is of vital importance. That's why this is the key to everything else. Rule of law in every aspect. And you know who's the worst communicators for foreign investors? Kosovars. I've had, when I was Norwegian ambassador, I was trying to get Norwegian investors to come. They would sit on the plane from Vienna to Pristina beside some guy from the diaspora who would tell them everything is wrong in Kosovo, don't put your money here, it's terrible. I've experienced this, and I've had to do a lot of work to try to explain to people that things are maybe not as bad as what you've been told. And I have, for example, one young Norwegian IT guy who established a small company here, he told me how smooth the registration process was. So I'm hearing slightly different things.
Well, I hope these businessmen didn't get on the first plane back.
Well, they tried, but I kept them here. But this is part of the problem.
Yeah.
People have to be a bit fair in how they depict the situation here,
Well,
because
public
everything is
relations
not bad.
Absolutely. Public relations is absolutely key, and selling your country positively is very
Every
important.
Kosovar is an ambassador of Kosovo.
Absolutely.
I can add something to it also. And the environment of investing is safe comparing to other countries. Because compare the cases of investment in Albania, for example. Yes. People get threatened, people get beaten, people get forced to leave the country, where we didn't see such cases in Kosovo.
Well,
I know some minor cases, okay, but we don't have major cases such as in Albania.
it's all about trust. And people have to, foreign investors will not put their money here if they don't think that the system is trustworthy. So this is an issue. But another issue, you mentioned the young population. Kosovo's economic growth is not bad. It's around 4%. It's one of the highest, I think it's the highest in the region. Problem for Kosovo is the demographics. You have so many young people, 50% younger than 25, 30% younger than 16. It's a tsunami of young people coming into the labor market.
Right. Can't absorb them.
And it's difficult to make the investments. Kosovo would need to have 10% annual economic growth in order to provide. And there's a further thing. I'm going to stop. Education system.
Yeah.
Company managers that I've met, and I've met many of them throughout Kosovo, complain to me about an inability to get qualified workers. Kosovo is educating thousands of young people who have no chance of getting a job. And this is bad, and it's undermining stability.
Well, they try to leave.
The ones who have something they can sell in Germany or Scandinavia, they leave. But I'm sorry, if you have an education, for example, in law, how many law students are there at the University of Pristina? I think 7,000 active. We don't have 7,000 law students in all of Norway. These young people will have a problem, and they won't be able to practice law in Norway, by the way. So, you know, this is a problem, and we have to help young people make the right education choices so that they have the possibility of getting a job. Employers here in Kosovo are telling me we can't find the skilled workforce we need. That's also hampering economic development of Kosovo.
Absolutely. I want to turn to another subject, because our time is limited. And I want to turn to the question of ethnic relations, particularly through the prism of local elections. Would you say that, start with you, Agron, would you say that the Serbian population in particular has become more involved and integrated in the country's political structure, administrative structure?
Well, it does look on the face of it, but I'm afraid that in democratic aspect, I think we have a problem with the Serb participation, not with the fact that they are participating, of course, that we need them to participate, and we have seen that in the last two elections they have participated more in the north, for example, where it was a problem before. But I think our problem revolves to the fact that they are being controlled, so to speak, by Belgrade through Lista Srpska, and in these elections we have seen enormous campaign from Belgrade government for Serbs to vote only one party. And only one party of Serbs has now, will be governing all of the Serbs. And I think that's not good for the democratic process itself. It's also not good for the process of reconciliation on a local level. Because I think that as long as there is just one party representing Serbs and that party is swearing allegiance to Belgrade, we have a problem which might be coming sooner or later on our table. And I think this is the one issue that I've seen that worries me. On the other hand, I think that the Serb population is getting more integrated, not only because of political processes, but mainly because of the economy and everything else surrounding them. And I think that the majority population is also getting more relaxed about the fact. And in that regard, I think that we have seen a proper situation, so to say, because there were no incidents, nothing has been going on in inter-ethnic issues. Right. We have had incidents which were related to the political problems that each community has, but not inter-ethnic, and this is good, because previously, 10 years ago, it was very difficult to imagine that you might be having an inter-ethnic sort of election happening in one municipality in which Albanians and Serbs vote together and they select, you know, their people, and nothing really happens negatively. So I think that is a good sign.
Jan, what is the OSCE assessment on ethnic relations through local elections?
Actually, I very much agree with what Adrian said, especially the last part. I mean, we see that inter-ethnic relations, inter-community relations are normalizing. When we, as OSCE, were involved in the election process in the north, supporting the CEC, Central Election Commission, both in June, what we saw was that Kosovo IDs were being used predominantly by people who live north of the Ibaj. That wouldn't have happened 3 years ago or 5 years ago. That's a positive thing. The turnout was 42%, which was at, it's never been higher. It's been increasing year by year. They are participating in Kosovo elections under Kosovo legislation. A Kosovo voters list. This is what they're doing. We saw Central Election Commission posters, logos, all over the north. Not a problem. 3 years ago, that would have been a huge issue. We would have had people protesting outside the polling centers. It didn't happen this time. I think slowly, step by step, things are normalizing. And as Adnan says, fewer and fewer inter-ethnic security incidents. There are still some that are happening, and they concern us because they shouldn't be happening. But fewer this year than the year before, so it's a positive trend. And we see car plates from all over Serbia, all over Kosovo. People are moving. Freedom of movement, I dare to say, is not an issue. Kosovars generally do not care. They feel comfortable. And I think more and more Kosovo Serbs feel the same. I think the challenge that Kosovo Serbs face are very similar to the challenges being faced by Kosovo Albanians and Kosovo Bosniaks and Kosovo Roma and Kosovo Turks and others. The fact is they don't have jobs. Economy, I think that is the key to further normalization. But they are participating more in the Kosovo system now than ever before. And I think Pristina needs to do its utmost to encourage them to come into the Kosovo system. That brings stability. Imagine 3 years ago we had barricades in the north. It was almost impossible to move. We don't see it now. That's a good thing.
Lorik, how do you see Belgrade's role in particular in Kosovo, the local elections, Lista Srpska and so forth?
Well, I agree with Argon and Mr. Ambassador that we have a higher turnout from all the past elections that we have had. Although I cannot say that there was no Belgrade influence, because for sure they were, because for every important decision they have to travel to Belgrade and to consult them. But it's good because even in the second round we have had two Serb municipalities that have had major turnout comparing to Albanian municipalities. And I also agree that freedom of movement is not an issue anymore, because I have to present the case of RTK2 here, because we have created a bridge to connect Albanians and Serbs and other communities that are living here. We have 100 employers of Serbs coming daily to Pristina to work here in the market, close to market. They are traveling on their own.
From Mitrovica,
from Štrpce, from Gjilan, from Gračanica, from all parts of Kosovo. And they are walking freely. They are working. They are doing their job freely. We have had 2 years ago in a protest one case of assaulting one journalist, which was isolated, and that's it. no cases anymore. Plus, you are seeing the same workers going out freely, even for their lunch break, even town. So kind of we have given an example how to integrate them. And this example should be used also from local and also from central government to do the same. And not to isolate people in one ministry, integrate all the services in the Ministry of Returnees, share them, invite them, encourage them to apply in different levels. So we have to live together.
You take us to the role of journalist. I want to ask Agron, both of you are experienced journalists. How do you assess media coverage of elections in Kosovo and more generally, more general questions at national level? In other words, can a citizen gain a fully objective view of his or her choices?
In one word, chaotic.
Chaotic. Okay.
I think
Explain.
I think there are media established and committed, so to say, to follow the campaign by the standards that generally apply to journalism. You know, you have to double-check things, you have to be truthful in reporting, you have to be balanced, especially in election time. I'm afraid that too many other media, new media, especially the ones based on internet, do not follow these standards, and they have been very vocal into cheering even for certain parties or into negative campaigning against some others, and it creates a very distorted picture about not only the campaign itself but also about the media landscape here, because I do think that Kosovo does have a lot of good journalists, and there are media which are committed to true journalism, but in the eyes of the public I'm afraid that the media are becoming a part of the problem, so to speak. On the other hand, the campaign itself is simplified in screening and shouting between politicians, and especially in the second round we have seen that very little of plans about what they are going to do in the next 4 years has been presented, and there was more of mudsliding between them. So I think it doesn't help, and we probably need as a society to find a way to deal with campaigns without getting too emotional to the level that we start not only screaming at each other but not hearing each other as well. And I think media should play a bigger role there. Unfortunately, sometimes we are simply not allowed to do it because of the number of media that exist, and also because of the political party influence on several of the media, especially, as I said, the new ones. New technology makes it possible for a political party to create a media without ownership being detected, and to use it whenever they would need it, in campaign or otherwise.
Jan, what is the OSCE assessment of not just the media in general, but particularly when it comes to election reporting?
I think it's, again, it's getting better year by year. But what Agron is mentioning about the new media, which I guess aren't new anymore actually, but it's problematic. Media economy is problematic. And a media with a weak financial basis, a weak economy, is more susceptible to selling their services to the highest bidder. That's not a specific issue for Kosovo, though. And I think so, but it's a general, I say, European and North American issue. And it's something that is worrisome. But I think when we look at the media reporting in this election campaign, I very much agree with the EU election observation report that this reporting was generally balanced and fair. There was access to the media. I followed myself a number of television debates of mayoral candidates from various municipalities. I agree with Agron, some of the debates got very heated. This is a question of political culture, and it's something that everybody needs to reflect a bit on.
I think we might want to add that this year especially we have had an increase of threats and pressure towards journalists, and I think it adds to the overall pressure that we feel.
Including some beatings.
Well, there were, not related maybe to the campaign itself, but even so, the fact that the journalist has to take into account that his work might cost him a lot adds to the pressure that you feel in economy, especially if you are independent. I mean, and in a country in which the government and the political entities are the biggest investor and employer, to go against them costs a lot. So I think these sort of pressures do have their effect, and I do agree. We need a better market, organized and legally binding, so to say, so that everybody has a fair chance in the same market and even hand.
Lorik, in particular, I wanted to turn to the social media question. It's a big issue now, as you know, in the United States. What impact did the social media have on elections, even at micro level? You know, was there some manipulation, particularly with the Russia question? What role does it play here in Kosovo in terms of people's decision making?
Well, as Agron said, for medias that have national frequency, they have to respect guidelines and standards that are already based on the law, whereas the online media that we can call also as a new media, because they are gradually turning out as a television media, although online. They don't have to, they are not respecting this, and there's no fine or there's no monitoring of them as it is for media, because if our television broadcasts a clip longer than it is supposed to be by guidelines of Central Election Commission, we get a fine. But it doesn't happen with online media, because they publish, even on a Saturday when it is not allowed, they publish these posters of, and what was surprisingly happening, this journalists of many online media, they publicly support the candidates. Through their status, and which didn't happen before. They have a major role because people now want fast news.
Yeah.
They cannot wait for central news bulletin of RTK. They want fast news. They are using the smart equipment, and they want to get to the news. And sometimes, and maybe it will increase more, we are having fake news. Fake news as a reference.
Sometimes they get news which they think, well, they get something which they think is news but isn't. How is the OSCE, in the past few years you've had an explosion of social media. You've had all these alternative so-called medias coming in influencing people. How does that affect the OSCE role in monitoring the impact of the media on the political process?
Well, of course, it becomes more challenging because there are more media outlets and more difficult to monitor. I can't say that we monitor these social media outlets systematically, at least not as systematically as we monitor the mainstream media outlets, but we do monitor them. We try to work with journalists, also journalists from the new media, on media training and how to, I mean, what is good media, what is good, you know, checking of sources and whatnot. So we include them in our media and journalist trainings, but we also work on media literacy, we call it, for the audience, for young people especially. And we're trying to work now with, we are working with the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology to include media literacy in the curriculum of the secondary schools. It's early days, we still haven't gotten there yet, but we're in discussions with MEST on that. And we think this is very important in order to sensitize young people especially to what they need to be on the lookout for, to how to be smart consumers of media. So we're attacking it also from that. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for everyone, but we need to work on it.
Agron, you've had some experience in this, I think, as a long-time journalist and editor in terms of the so-called fake news, phenom, disinformation. How would you assess it? How do we combat this?
Well, it's a global problem, of course. I think we have seen big debates all over the world about this, and new technology. I wouldn't blame technology for it. It's about the people who use it. Sure. And I think in our newsroom, for example, at Co-Editor and in COA Group generally, we try to detect the credibility of the source. And it comes down to the basics. You either believe somebody who tells you something or not. So whether it is a person or it is somebody posing as media online, it doesn't matter. You need to be convinced yourself that you trust this guy telling you something before you republish that claim. And of course, you need to check that claim again, and you need to corroborate. You need to have answers of any other persons who are implicated in the issue. And I'm afraid that this need for fast news turning into fake news is something that there's a lot of fuel being put into it by the people who want to get things done for themselves, like the political parties or even business entities, who don't really want to get the truth out. They simply want to get a perception out. And I think this is the problem that we will need to address. in newsroom, in a newspaper, maybe it sounds easier to do because you have one deadline in 24 hours. It's probably more problematic for those who have permanent deadlines every hour or every minute. But I think one needs to go back to the basics, as I said. There are some rules for journalism which are there since 150 years ago. And I think they have served us well in different technological times. So I think we should pursue them in future times as well. And sometimes, you know, giving away a little bit of your speed to gain accuracy is the better thing to do.
Lorik, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, if we're talking about the fake news, yes. We do also have a code of ethics for journalists that are standards, professional standards that are public on our websites that everybody can download them and see. They are adopted from BBC and also fulfilled towards the legislation that we have in Kosovo. Journalists have to read this, have to consult their editors and their supervisors before giving this fake news because it has an impact. We cannot say anymore that it doesn't have an impact, especially now when everybody owns a smartphone and can check this.
Jan, very last question, going back to the younger generation, because I think one of the key questions is how to involve both in turnout but also involvement in politics for so many young people in Kosovo, given both an economic stake but also a political stake in this country. I think both are key. How would you, what recommendations would you give as head of OSCE?
Well, first of all, it's very important that young people in Kosovo do engage, and actually they do. In the June elections, there were 116,000 new voters compared to the 2014 elections. And what our surveys tell us is that young voters, new voters, vote at a higher rate than the population in general. So this is exceptional for Kosovo, and I think it's a good sign. I think young people need to be encouraged to be active. There should be youth councils in all municipalities and youth councils that are taken seriously, that are actually included in some decision making. This is the training ground for new politicians.
Sure.
And the quality of politician depends on training, experience, and we have to start young. People should think about that. I also think that the education system needs to be a bit more modern, maybe. Modern pedagogical methods, encourage critical thinking, encourage debate, but fair debate. Debate that allows everyone to speak and to listen. It's not only about speaking, it's also about listening. So I think it's a kind of a culture of civic discourse that needs to be encouraged. And I think the education system has a very important role to play. We as OSCE are doing things in various areas and various levels, but you know, everything we do with Kosovo institutions, because that's the way we work. So we're trying to work at various levels in order to encourage and bring youth into the system, not into the system, but to engage with decision making.
Right. I'm going to presume the media has a role to play in this as well.
Well, of course, because the young generation is not going to be all politicians. There will be other profiles, so to speak, and I think that we need a better, more qualitative primary education so that people, as Ambassador said, get involved early and understand early how the democracy functions and that you actually need to listen to the other. And at the end, the argument has to prevail, not the heat or the emotion. Sure. But also we need people who are capable of doing different sort of jobs which will keep the politicians and the government under monitoring constantly, because not only media or diplomats monitor the system.
Civic society.
The civic society is very important, and also independent institutions, which unfortunately so far in our country are not so independent as they should be.
Lorik, last word, because we're almost out of time.
Yes, the youth are being encouraged to be active, to take part, but I think that youth should not see, for example, in politics, being member of a municipal assembly. It's not only a place where you get a salary and you go to meetings. You need to raise your voice in order to be more active and to encourage other young generations to participate. although we do need to have changes in our education, as Mr. Ambassador said, because for journalists, for example, all faculties have journalism studies, and we cannot absorb all those journalists who are finishing their faculties. Although, as RTK and maybe also Kosovo, we are giving the youth very good space for their engagement in shows, in debates, in also in the work, because we have several agreements with universities to do a practice here in RTK. But it's not enough. We need to change the educational system in order to orientate people where we need them, because as Ambassador mentioned, there are several factories, several institutions that don't have qualified workers. We have had a report of winery in Suarica region that they announced 500 workers they were requesting. They got only 50 because people are not qualified to do it, and they don't want to. They want to work in administration, and it's simple, sit in office and do a job.
On that note, thank you all for a fascinating discussion. Love to have you all back at some point. Unfortunately, we have already come to the end of today's show. I've greatly enjoyed being with you and with my colleagues here at RTK. Good night, everyone. Stay healthy, be productive, and remain optimistic. See you all very soon. Miro Pavshin.